And there's a belief that we need to recognize the sophistication of our children's everyday use of digital media, and that we actually need greater integration of digital technology into education to equip children for increasingly high-tech future. And they will be expected to be digital natives after all. On the other hand, there are obvious anxieties about extensive screen time and what or whom children may encounter in the online world in an environment that could be hard to police and monitor. So, how much time should we be allowing our children with screens? What boundaries should we set for them? And are there actually any benefits to them using screens and other digital devices? So I'll let our panel introduce themselves in a bit more detail now, and then we'll dive into the questions.
Thank you. So my name's May. I'm a speech and language therapist. This is my main background. I'm currently working in an inclusive kindergarten in Hong Kong. So I do speech and language therapy there, but I also provide support for any children with special educational needs. I'm the Senko at the kindergarten, and I work across all age groups in there, so from the 6 months old all the way through to 5 years, so a good understanding of overall child development.
Hello, my name is Julie. I'm also a speech and language therapist, and I've worked for 20 years now at the Child Development Centre here in Hong Kong. I started out just doing speech therapy, but now I'm actually managing the team of therapists, and I'm also overseeing all of our programs. So I work with children with special needs of different types, all range of abilities, and specialise in age 0 to 6, so very much preschool, kindergarten population.
Hello, my name's Vina, and I'm the school psychologist at Harrow International School. The main responsibilities I have with my job is being a consultant, which means I work very closely with teachers, housemasters, housemistresses and parents whenever there's an issue identified with a child in terms of their learning needs, or whether it's emotional, behavioural or social, and my role there is to give support and advice and strategies. In some cases my role will mean that I will need to do therapy work and sometimes assessments. But I work primarily with children from age 3 to 18, and some of the more proactive things that I do a lot of work with parents. So at Harrow, I run a range of parenting talks and seminars, because I think that's an important part of my work as a psychologist within the school community.
Okay, thank you. So diving in with the titular question, how much screen time do you think is okay for a child on a daily or a weekly basis? And for instance, is one 60-minute block better or worse than 3 smaller 20-minute blocks? What do we think about that? And Rena, since you've got the mic, do you want to start?
I think we have to acknowledge that the world that we live in today is very different to the world that we grew up in. So screens are naturally going to be a part of our day-to-day lives. So I think for me that it's about making sure that the screen time we subject our children to is relevant, it's developmentally age appropriate, and that it's good for the child's learning. So I think for me, the main things you need to consider is looking at your own child as an individual. What are their specific interests? What do they enjoy? How do they seem when they are engaging with screen time? And then I would also consider looking at the contents. So what is it that you're exposing them to? What learning do they gain from it? Is it useful for them? But I also think as part of that learning is, are you making that screen time interactive? Are they just sitting there in front of a screen for a number of hours or minutes by themselves? Or are you as a parent or another adult sitting with them and allowing an opportunity where it can be interactive whilst learning from what the screen has to offer? I think these things are important consideration when we decide how much screen time a child should be exposed to.
Just think, agree with everything that Rena said, and I think a really interesting fact, this year, the World Health Organization, as well as the American Academy of Pediatrics, released advice on the amount of time that they recommend children to be using screens, whether that be phones, iPads, Kindles, TV, computer screens. And in fact, up to age 2 years, it's none, 0. And from age 2 to 5, it's up to 60 minutes, so maximum of 60 minutes. So I think sometimes that can be quite shocking for us to hear that as parents. Yeah, and one of the biggest reasons there's the research that's been done on children and screens and how it's affecting us and affecting our brains, it's ongoing. It has to go through a whole generation yet to be conclusive. But the main reasons that they say they give that very short time, it seems a very short time, is it takes away, if your child is looking at a screen all day, it takes away from the other things they should be doing, sleeping maybe, because so I'm guilty. I'll sometimes be looking at my phone before I go to sleep, and you get distracted, and moving and playing, and children learn through play, and there's increasing childhood obesity. So the fact that children are more static, and because there is more interaction with technology, actually seems to be having an effect on physical health. So I think that's just the way that those bodies are looking at screen time issues. Yeah.
Sorry. Anything else?
Can we talk about all the evils of too much screen time, but can we highlight some specific dangers that come with being addicted to screens?
Okay. Just building really on what Julie has said about the research out there looking at the impact of screens and using screens is really showing that children are missing out on other aspects of their experiences. And we all learn through interactive experiences. So as Julie said, the children are not necessarily moving as much, so they're not developing those gross motor skills, their fine motor skills, the sensory experiences. They're missing out on all of this. And coming from a language perspective as well, children learn language through interaction. They learn language and social skills through having somebody there responding to them, and then having that continuous back and forth. And the children are kind of missing out on that if they are attached to their screens the whole time. It also, again, affects sleep patterns. So if we're thinking about how much time a child should have on a screen, we should also be thinking about what time of day they should be using that screen. If it's too close to their bedtimes, it's really going to be affecting their sleep habits as well.
Do you want to talk about this or no? I think it's sort of it all rolls together, doesn't it? And I think we need to realise, of course, there's educational benefits, and there's some really high quality. I mean, talking about the WHO and the American Academy of Pediatrics, one of the things is, that it's taking away from. They also say that you need the high quality screen time. Now, how they define that is obviously open to interpretation. How do you decide what's high quality screen time? And one of the things that I've heard, and I totally agree with, is that if you do allow your under 2-year-old any screen time at all, then it would be the FaceTime or the Skyping with grandparents or friends that would be the high quality screen time. And the reason for that is you've got a two-way interaction. They're learning, turn-taking in conversation, they're looking at people's facial expressions, and that's high quality screen time, rather than looking for maybe an ABC video that they can watch at that age. So it's sort of trying to think about that definition, and obviously everybody can think of that differently. But children learn. I don't think there's anything at a very young age that children would learn through using screens that they couldn't learn maybe in a better way through real experiences. So it's just worth thinking about it that way. Yeah. Rena, anything to add?
Just to add, I think in light of the global pandemic that we've experienced this year, it's just shown how much technology does play a positive role in terms of the FaceTiming, Skyping with families overseas and keeping that connection going for children. So I think all these are really important and valuable things that we can bring to children's lives. But I think with the use of screen time, it's just ensuring as parents you create that balance so that it's essential to your child's learning and development and shouldn't be at the cost of other things. Like what's been described today, the importance of play, where through play you're building those key life skills that we want to see in our children ready for the 21st century. And the second point that I wanted to make, which I think I've forgotten, just that the research evidence to show that if you are putting on educational program for your children on the screen and you think it's for a period length of time and they're going to be learning so much from that, it will never be as good as real life learning, because the transference of learning and the skills they learn in real life will always be much better for them. So again, thinking about at the cost of their learning, screen time shouldn't be used as a replacement for real learning to take place.
Just to add on to that when at this age, at sort of kindergarten age, under 5, if you are giving screen time to your child, you've got some lovely apps, and they're interactive, and of course children love them. They become quite addictive. That actually they're strongly recommended that you be there with them. If you're going to give them that 30 minutes, 20 minutes, 15 minutes, looking at something, could be watching a video. I mean, it doesn't have to be something that's an educational app, but that you're actually, it's the same with TV. Ideally be there with them, talk together about what you see. So actually you try to add some human sort of interaction into it, and that they're not just blindly looking at the screen alone. Because of course, it's human, we all do it. Sometimes we will use screen time as a babysitter for 10 minutes because you're busy or you're on the phone. And of course, that's real life. But as far as possible, to just be there, interacting with them, if you can, is a better way, a better use of the screen time.
Julie, you mentioned using like FaceTime, for instance, as examples of like high quality digital use. Can we provide any further examples of what good use you can get out of digital screens and other tools? Because I've heard the argument that your digital diet needs to be like your food diet. It's not so much how much or how little you eat or use screens. It's the quality that you have.
Yeah. So the research shows that if you're trying to use certain activities for learning, that the interactive ones, they might click a box and something pops up. That is better for learning. So there's some really lovely educational apps. I mean, I will use them in my own speech therapy sometimes because it's a motivator for children in a session. That we might use an app together to work on something, but obviously we're interacting at the same time. There's some with Kindles. There's now Kindles for kids, there's Kindles for children, and there's some really good literacy learning apps that are meant to be quite helpful because they'll highlight certain letter combinations that children find difficult, and sometimes they're slightly older children, but they might have an easy way to define a difficult word, like a little picture comes up or something that helps them. So there's some really good things on Kindle. However, I would argue that a real book doesn't compare to using a Kindle for all sorts of reasons I don't have to go into now. But so there's different, and it's part of our lives, and it's going to be part of your children's lives when they go to school. It's just monitoring it and looking at quality and time, I think. Yeah.
I think it's very difficult as a consumer to figure out what are the best apps, because there's going to be hundreds of thousands, millions out there that are telling you that these apps are educational. So I think it's kind of the responsibility of the adult to investigate that app, research it, try it yourself, and look into actually, is this an interactive piece of learning for my child, or is it more the child's just sitting watching, and actually what are they learning from it? So as Julie said, there's definitely some more appropriate apps out there. It just takes that time to maybe look for them and to research them into it yourself.
In addition to apps, even if your child is just watching a program or some sort of show that's age appropriate, I think as a parent, it's taking the responsibility to be the asking parents, like really ask curiosity type questions to see what are they engaging in, what have they learned from what they're watching, and to allow an opportunity for you to have conversation with your children. I think that also increases quality screen time. It's the way you use that time with your child as well.
Children are obviously always, again, watching mum and dad. So what's the importance of role modelling in these situations too?
Again, guilty of being on my phone a lot and probably a bit too much. But there's kind of two aspects to it. So there's definitely the role modelling part. If children are seeing adults on their phones all the time, on their iPads, watching TV, then that just becomes the norm, and it becomes expected as to that's okay for the child to engage in the same behaviours. There's also the aspect of if you as an adult, me as an adult, are on our phones and paying attention to our phones, what are we missing from the interactions from the children? There has been a study recently showing that parents missed out on a certain amount of initiations from their child because the adults were on their phones. So maybe having a schedule for your own screen time use, and you don't check your emails at dinner time when you're with the children. You save that for later when the children are in bed or you're at work, kind of bringing that into some kind of routine into your use of the screen time as well as routine into the children's use.
I think it's, it's quite easy to sit down on the floor with your child and you're doing puzzles and you're playing, but you've still got your phone right here, and you just sort of glance over and a notification comes up and you press the button and you have a look. And actually, I think we all know how it feels. If you go out with friends for dinner and they've got their phone on the table, or even your partner, and the phone's on the table, and then you have a quick look, that connection is sort of lost, or you just don't feel you're being listened to, maybe. And I think this is absolutely true with children. And in fact, I watched an amazing video that was on US TV, and they did a little experiment, and they put a mother and a 2.5-year-old in a room together with lots of toys. They told the mother to engage with her phone for 2 minutes, in consecutive 2 minutes, and it was quite heartbreaking. So this little boy started playing, alone, and he was building the bricks, making a Lego structure, and then he started talking to his mum, and of course she wasn't engaging with him, and he tried again, and then he started saying, "Mummy, we've got other things to do." And then he went to the door, and actually he didn't even carry on playing because he wasn't getting anything from her. And then they did it with several children, and a little girl just curled up on a chair and completely stopped playing, and it was, whoa, it was very interesting to watch, actually. But I think we all do it, and if I'm out for dinner with friends, I try now to put my phone in my bag, because I know if it's there on the table, it's going to distract me. But, if we're going to have these present with us every minute of the day, then of course we're poor role models in terms of that for our children. So we can't be perfect all the time, but we just need to think about that.
I just wanted to add, it's really good if you can establish good habits from very early on with your children. So if you are establishing you could establish family rules where it's phone-free time, especially around things like dinner time, because that's such a quality time where everybody sits together. It wasn't until I started at Harrow 7 years ago where I just took it for granted that families sat together for dinner all together, but I realised very quickly within the context of Hong Kong, it is such a busy place. Parents work incredibly long hours. And very quickly, as a psychologist, I was trying to think of ways family can stay connected. So for those parents where the dad or mum can't be home for dinner, then I was talking to parents about, well, if it's on the weekend, that time that you have together, even if it's breakfast, it's quality time where you could be having open conversation, no phone, no technology, but you all agree that as a rule. And so when your children reach 15, there'll be no struggle with bringing iPads or mobile phones to the table, because they would have learnt very early on what the family rules are and why it's there.
I mean, aside from not checking emails at the dinner table, do we have any other tips and tricks that we can sort of set for like rules that families should try to stick to?
I think one key tip is to ensure that phones and things are handed in an hour before bedtime. Really, really get into good habits, which I realise for us as adults, that's really hard to do. Because we're always checking the emails or keeping up with friends or whatever it may be. But role modelling that to your children will also teach them the importance of how much you value sleep, and the understanding that we need that 1 hour before bedtime wind down to increase quality of sleep.
I think that that's true with the light also, the light that's emitted from devices. It apparently, research is showing that it affects your brain, the way that your brain works, and you can't actually settle down so well to sleep. So obviously we're desperate as parents of young children for them to sleep well. So if you don't, if right from the beginning, as Rena said, you had that as a absolute rule, but it does have to be for the whole family. It can't be just for one rule for them and one rule for us. So setting up rules, there's a lot of different types of routines you can set up from early on. You can, totally limiting the time per day, and as the children get older, you can say, well, could you want your 20 minutes with whatever now? I'm going to do this, and some families are really quite strict about that. Some families can use it as a little bit of a reward. Your child never wants to have a bath, so you can say, okay, bath first, then iPad time, but obviously then being careful about the number of minutes that you give. So I don't use the word bribe, use the word reward.
And setting up the habits around how long the child is having access to it. So if they're having your 20 minutes, again, it's really easy for us to kind of get distracted and, oh no, they've had 30 minutes, it doesn't matter today. But really try and keeping that consistent, and giving the children a warning. So when that 20 minutes is coming to an end, to say you've got 5 more minutes, now you've got 2 more minutes, allowing the child to process the fact that that time is coming to an end, should help to reduce the upset when that time has finished.
I mean, obviously we've been talking a lot about all the negatives here. What are like the supposed benefits of becoming used to technology and screens early on for children?
I think, as Julie said already, use it and about the current situation. Using it to stay connected is a great tool for using any kind of technology. We can, and particularly within Hong Kong, when we have so many international families, children are maybe not seeing their grandparents very often. They're not seeing their cousins, but having that opportunity to connect through FaceTime, through Zoom, through Skype, is a great opportunity to develop those relationships and build on that.
And again, I said earlier, TV programs, watching with your child, and that can, it can be a wind down for children. We all like to watch something in the evenings, and so we've been doing that for years. That's nothing new. And just looking at the quality of everything else, really. And it is part of our lives, but they will learn that digital knowledge in school. They don't need to, that you don't need to spend a lot of time on technology before they start school. They're just digital savvy nowadays anyway, and they will learn all of those skills. They'll be given their computers from the minute they start. So it's not, don't ever think, well, I've got to expose them to knowing how to do this and this and this on the computer or an iPad, because they will learn it. Just the same with reading and writing. They're going to learn it in primary 1, or it's not something that has to be done at the age of 2.
No? Something that within our kindergarten that we use is an app that allows the parents to see what the child has done in school that day. So that's another nice way to kind of promote a conversation. Again, you're having that time with the child at the screen, but you can look back at the pictures from the day and because how many times does your child come home and you say, what have you done today? Nothing, or don't know. Well, having that prompt is a nice prompt for conversation to be able to talk about what's happened that day. So building those narrative skills, building those memory skills as well, as long as it is an interactive interaction.
There are some fairly negative terms, for parents these days who are, control freaks, like, helicopter parents, always watching over their children. So how much do we think parents should be kind of watching, what their children are doing with screens or electronic devices? Do they need to be, looking over their shoulder 24/7, or can you give them a little leeway, or are they too young for that?
I'll pass this to Rena, probably being working with slightly older children. I honestly think at kindergarten age that they shouldn't really have any open access to the internet. I don't think it's necessary. And you should obviously, you're downloading the apps, what they're watching. I think that's probably pretty easy to police, if you like, at this age, and I don't think that's necessary. Yeah.
I think, from the moment children are able to talk, we should be having conversations with them and making them aware that the responsibilities you have to have as parents to help monitor and keep them safe from what's on the internet. So I do think parents need to play a very active role in the early years. But as children get older, I think it is still an important role for parents to be monitoring and overseeing what access children have to various different social media platforms, for instance. So I always tell my parents, look at what the age limits are for the various different platforms, for WhatsApp, Facebook, Snapchat, and there's so much more. I think I'm too old for it all now. And to have those conversations with children about what's age appropriate, and for children to also be very open with you about what they're doing on their phone. And I think it's okay that they do hand their phones in and parents are checking, because I think children today, they're not emotionally mature or equipped to deal with the level of pace that they're exposed to on the internet and social media. They cannot keep up with it. So I actually am all for parents playing a role in sort of overseeing that without feeling the need of control, but making children aware of why you're doing that, having those sort of very open and honest conversations with them.
So I don't personally know much about them, but there's software for older children where you actually can block things on the internet. You can Google it, and there are a lot of parents do that. There's privacy settings, obviously making sure Facebook privacy settings are set properly. I think it is our responsibility as they're growing up to do that, and certainly those blocking or sort of things on the net, the internet is worthwhile, I would say.
I mean, without getting too old-fashioned, are there any sort of, what activities can we suggest, which don't involve using digital devices, or perhaps it's more relevant, like if there's a kid who cries every time the iPad is taken away, can we suggest any strategies for sort of weaning them off that sort of dependency?
Children naturally love to play, and play is where children learn. So any activity that we as parents or carers, any helpers, can just be interacting, giving focus to a child. There's a lot of research out there that shows when an adult is engaged with a child with an activity, they actually stay at that activity a lot longer. So then they're going to be learning more from it. They're going to be developing their attention skills. So if it's sitting down and reading a story, just sharing a book with your child, playing with puzzles with your child, doing any role play, imaginative play. And I often say this to parents, the sillier you feel, the better that is, the more fun that is for your child. And it's hard. I mean, I do this every day in my job. I can let go. People look in the window and think I look ridiculous. I think it's quite hard for parents to sometimes let loose a little bit. But if you can, and you can just take on those characters and become part of that role play with your children as well, all of that is going to be developing their imagination, their language, their physical skills. So much learning can happen through that interaction. But if that is something you feel uncomfortable with, playing with puzzles, reading stories, that is all really, really beneficial. And children really, really love that time, and they love that time with their parents.
Just to add to what May has said, all these, I'm really big on play, and one of the presentations I do every year at Harrow is all about the importance of play, because I really feel that we can develop resilience and emotional intelligence through play, and everything that May described promotes all the skills that we want to be developing in children from a young age, so that they're ready for the 21st century. So things like being able to problem solve, independent thinking, making decisions through play, having curiosity through pretend play, developing their language and communication. We mustn't underestimate what play can do for our children.
Also, I mean, I think, you know, you can be thinking we can't be with our child every second on the floor and doing this and doing the right thing. So use other opportunities, you know, they can help with the laundry, you know, they can help take the things out of the laundry basket, they can fold washing, you know, they can, all of those self-help skills, helping to get the table ready. Actually, children love doing this stuff. They love being a helper. So don't, you know, there's other opportunities, and also children, as well as they're going to be learning most when somebody is interacting with them, but they will also learn to play independently. So you know, you get a balance as long as you know they're safe. As long as you're checking in with them every time, wow, look, you built such a great tower or something, but you're busy doing something else, or your helper is busy doing something else. That also builds other types of skills. So understand that you can't always be there in the moment playing with your child, but just draw them into the life of the household, really. And I think that's something that children do less of in Hong Kong, because we have helpers. You know, they often don't get to go to the supermarket. Whereas, you know, I'm from the UK, and it's just you take your children everywhere, and that's a learning experience. So things like that, you know, making sure that they are actually taking part in everyday routines that sometimes, again, you know, maybe the helper is doing all of the cooking, and then the child is kept out of the kitchen because it's not safe. But, you know, making a little space in the kitchen where they can get all the plastic boxes and lids out of the cupboard and stack them and match them, you know, that's a learning opportunity. So rather than giving them the phone or the TV, you know, maybe drawing them in a little bit, a few minutes here and there to do those things is good.
I can't remember the exact quote, but it's something along the lines of boredom leads to creativity. So again, we often think we must be entertaining our children all the time. But if we give them those moments of them we're not providing them with something directly to do, they're going to think of it themselves. They're going to be creative. They're then going to go and explore in the kitchen and see what they can find. They're going to explore in their bedrooms, and they will definitely start coming up with their own ideas and their own entertainment.
Rena, you mentioned the need to kind of talk with your child as soon as you can about screens and the like. But how do you have that dialogue with young children of 4, 5, 6? How do you necessarily tell them what the internet is, for example? Do we have any advice?
It is a hard one, but I think you've just got to use language that's age appropriate. I mean, there won't be. I mean, it's making sure they can understand that the internet is a big forum where there could be bad things on there, which is why you have, as a parent, you have a responsibility to keep an eye on things and to monitor. And I do think we can teach children what may be dangers, what are warning signs, and just have conversations with them about that. But it's making it age appropriate in the language that you use, that you know your child will understand.
I'm talking about the whole picture, so the positives and the negatives. We don't want to turn it into a big scary place. No. We don't want to turn it into something that they do secretively. So just having those open and honest conversations and talking about the whole picture is really good.
How have we noticed the current pandemic has impacted things? Because obviously with children being at home more, there's been a lot more use of screen time. So how has that affected things?
I think for me at Harrow, if I just reflect on the experiences we've had, we very quickly recognised that children, and I'm talking about older children, have really struggled with the use of screen time all day for all their lessons. So we've had to make adjustments so that we've given them a break from screens and we've arranged sort of off-screen projects for them to engage in. So very quickly we realised that it has been quite exhausting, the level of concentration that people need to have on screens for each of their lessons. For the younger students, they've had a much reduced timetable of access to screen time, but then we have been encouraging play as much as possible and other projects where they can engage in developing their skills without relying on the screen too much.
I think it's opened up ideas. I think we probably never could have imagined that teachers or could imagine that you could deliver as people have been doing over the last few months. So I think, we've learned that often in Hong Kong, for example, I work with kindergarten age, and it's not unusual to have a closure for flu. It's happened over the last few years. We had 2 or 3 weeks closure for flu, and for us at our centre, essentially we close. The staff are there, but, we're not really providing for the children. So although for my age, I think those Zoom lessons and sessions are much more challenging anyway, because although the child loves the screen, you still got to keep their attention. It's quite difficult. You haven't got the toys to share and so on. But it's at least, there are benefits, and the world is moving forward, and it has opened up opportunities for us to realise that if there are other closures and over time, we had a tricky time with the protests at the end of the year. We were often having to close in the middle of the day, and children's education was affected hugely. So it's great to have this technology to do this, but so it's opened up a whole new world, but not one that we want to depend on, because we really like to be there with them and interacting with them face to face.
We'll go through 1 or 2 more questions before taking questions from the audience. So get ready. I was wondering, are there any different approaches to this topic from like Western families versus Asian families? Do we notice any differences or struggles?
I think when I think about parenting seminars and workshops that I run, just some of the things I noted is for day-to-day living. So typically I notice with the Chinese family, children often go to bed much later because parents, the mothers particularly, want to wait until the husbands have got home so the husband can have time with the children before they go to bed. And I remember in one of my first workshops, the Western parents were completely shocked by the bedtime routine for their children who were of the same age. I think the Western parents were putting their children to bed at 6:37, but for the Chinese families it was around 9:30, 10 o'clock. So that was one of the notable differences for me. And I think my general observation, particularly living in Hong Kong, when I'm out on the weekends, and I just noticed lunchtimes, just the amount of technology there is on the table, but with really, really small children, where each member of the family has an iPad or a smartphone. Even 7 years on, I'm still amazed by that. It still really blows me away just how much screen time there is when it's valuable quality family time, which I think is precious because we don't always get a lot of that, that we have to really make those moments count. And I think I noticed differences between cultures there in terms of expectations around the dinner table, especially on the weekend when they're out socially. I've noticed that.
Yeah, I think I just want to echo what Rena said. I think I noticed that an awful lot everywhere, actually. It's not just in Hong Kong. And I just think that's a real shame. Just 30 minutes in a coffee shop on a Sunday, a lovely family, and the children are sitting watching an iPad video, and that's just such a perfect moment to talk about anything. Even if you have, I remember with my children, if ever I went out to eat, I always carried a bag full of, had my crayons and some stickers. It's not that they're going to sit there doing nothing, but at least if they've got crayons and stickers, there's still some interaction with talking to them and actually helping them to self-regulate, because I think if they're self-regulating by looking at a screen, that's what's keeping them still. Whereas if you're eating a bit and then they want to get down, they want to move around, but you sort of teach them, okay, it's time to sit now, let's do a bit of colouring. They're sort of, they're learning some of those sort of other sorts of skills that some places we go, we have to sit still, and they sort of learn how to do that. So that does still upset me hugely when I see that, because I just think, oh, this is a great time. Talk about what you're eating, talk about what you like, what we're going to do later. Yeah, sort of special time.
I think the current situation as well has maybe impacted across the world about children going outside to play and having those opportunities to go to the playgrounds, to go to the beaches, and how much do we support that in our children. Obviously, they haven't had those opportunities over the last 6 or so months, so children have been indoors a lot more, in which case you tend to go to the screens a lot more than you would if they were out and about. So I don't necessarily know if that's a cultural thing, but I think Hong Kong, all families in Hong Kong tend not to experience it outdoors as much, just because of the environment we're living in. The parks aren't as accessible as they are in other places. Sometimes it's just too hot to be outside all day. Sometimes it's raining, typhoons, all of that. I think those outdoor opportunities are really, really important for children.
I just wanted to add as well that, we have to be responsive to the dynamics of Hong Kong too. So with the helper culture being a big part of many families' lives in Hong Kong, I'm very much aware of that, the role that they play within the family home, which I think is very important given how much they see children, how much time they spend with children. So one of the things I also do at Harrow is run workshops specifically for helpers and empowering them, upskilling them to also play an important role, not to pair them, but to engage them in the way they can communicate and interact with children without feeling like they need to be doing everything for the child. When we're trying to promote independence in children and the ability for them to think for themselves, we're not allowing the helper to take that away from them by doing things for them. Because obviously they are trained, but they operate in a certain way, so we need to do more to support them and build their confidence. So I know that over the years, the work with helpers has been quite successful, and I think parents have really appreciated that. So I think the more we can be aligned in the family home, the better it is for the children.
Just thinking about helpers again and talking about being role models. So I think that's another thing, the discussion that we need to have with our helpers. Because where I work at the Child Development Centre, our families wait. We have quite a small space in Wan Chai, and our families wait outside in the lobby. And a lot of the children are brought by helpers, and most of the time the helpers will be on their phones. So if we're talking about being good role models for the, when it's time we're spending with our children, then, and as families make decisions, okay, we're going to have, screen-free meal times. We're going to have screens put away an hour or 2 hours before bed, then we also need to engage with that helper to make sure that they are doing the same actually with it. I mean, obviously we can't stop them using their phones completely, but the helpers that do sit outside and having a little chat with the child, or they're looking at a book, or they're just it's so nice. Yeah.
Given the time, we'll throw it open to the audience now. So any questions? What do we have in mind?
Hi, thank you very much for the panel discussion. It was very informative and very, very insightful. So thank you all for being here. I do have a brief question about, we did discuss the dangers of the internet and how it's important to try to drive conversation to get them to understand it as soon as possible. The question that I have is, how regular should these reminders be? Because you don't want to constantly tell them how dangerous the internet is. A, you would make them scared of it, and B, they would kind of be desensitized to those warnings. So when do we know that the child has acknowledged and has accepted the dangers of the internet, so that we can kind of but lessen the frequency of our warnings? So that's, how do we achieve that point?
When do we know that they've taken this lesson on board? Who wants to?
I think only you can judge what your child knows by the way they're behaving day to day. I think if you're noticing that, it would be very clear if they haven't really understood, or their behaviour shows you that they're not really respecting the rules and things that you may have set up for them. And therefore, it's about revisiting that conversation and asking them asking questions to get to a place where you understand. But I don't think it's something that you need to keep, being actively on in terms of having to talk about the dangers. You don't want to scare them. I think once you've had those conversations, and then generally you can see that they're responding well to using it safely with your presence or another adult in the home, and it's going reasonably well, then it's fine. I don't think we need to have that extra worry. We don't want to scare them at all. But I think if their behaviour becomes notable where it becomes a concern, that's when you need to sit down and just have a conversation with them to help them understand. So we don't want to tell them off. We want to help them understand because they're still so young and they're learning to use technology in a way that's at such a rapid pace. So we need to be mindful of that.
Next question.
Maybe I can come up with some. So actually, it's a very interesting panel. Thank you for sharing your professional tips and knowledge with us. So we are parents of a child that is under 2, and we do give him a TV time. There's a show he loves to watch. There's mostly songs, and we see that he learns things and interacts. We're obviously trying to do it with him and so on and so on. But there are obviously people saying like we shouldn't be doing it if it's like under 2 or less than 18 months. So if it's like you were saying, if it's very balanced, so it's, let's say, less than 20 minutes or 20 minutes a day, and he gets enough of a playtime, he gets enough of an interaction with parents, interaction with kids, do we still need to worry and try to like cut it off completely, or is it okay? Is there any like maybe physiological damage that we're creating in his brain or eyes? Like these,
I think Julie referenced it really early on. The research into is it affecting the actual way the brain works is still quite new, and we need a generation really to have that understanding. So the main recommendations at the moment is if children are on screen time too much, they're not doing the movements, the play. So as long as you're ensuring that he's getting those experiences as well, he's not missing out, he's not sedentary all day, he's still getting that chance to play. You can interact with him about what he's watched, sing the songs together at another time. So you're making that interactive, and you're making it that learning experience.
My oldest child was sort of pre-smartphone or iPad, and I've got 4 children, and they all had TV time, from probably 1 year old or so. But in a similar way, it was usually early evening. I was there. We'd sort of interact. Those sorts of when they're imitating movements and that they're actually learning. So, and you sound very aware of it. I think it's when children are sort of plonked in front of a TV or a screen and left there. Nobody really speaks to them. People are happy because they're not bothering, they're quiet. That's when we need to worry, and when it becomes an overarching sort of thing in the routine. But it sounds as if you're, very aware of it. Yeah, so don't worry.
Just bring it back to the context and the content. So what they're being exposed to, the context being who's there with them, how often are you able to interact with them and ask them questions about what they're watching, and see how much they're learning from it. But again, it's making sure it's not at the cost of other things, like the importance of play. As long as you fit all these things in, and I actually think short burst of screen time in a day is absolutely fine. It's more than fine.
And it also sounds as if you're having fun as well. So that's a bonding thing with your child. You're doing something together. You're laughing about it together, and so that's got a lot of value. So.
Thanks for your time today. It's very informative. Julie, you mentioned earlier, you cited WHO guidelines, right? No screen time up till 2 years old, and then from 2 to 5 up to 60 minutes. Maybe I'm asking the obvious, but how do you make the best use of those 60 minutes for a 2-year-old? who's doing screen time for the first time?
The first time. I mean, children naturally love to watch, Peppa Pig or whatever it is, so it can be used several minutes, a few minutes can be used as a downtime in the early evening, I would say. Or, you've been out in the middle of the day and it's hot and you've got back home and you just want, you have a drink of water and a little bit of a break before you start other routines or things to do together. So I think it's just finding quality apps or sort of age-appropriate TV shows where it doesn't have to be with them learning something, but it just has to be fun. Like we say, it's better if you're with them or commenting or interacting with them somehow on what they're doing. And I think that's the main thing, really, that they're not completely abandoned with a screen for 30 minutes. So, yeah, does that answer your question?
I was just going to add that you don't have to go straight into the full 60 minutes. You can just build it so it's a gradual amount of minutes per day and just see how your child reacts to it. They might actually not like it at all, or they might really engage with it. Then you can judge what works best for your child.
Oh, time's up. So, thank you for coming this morning, and thank you to our